I assume that the majority of you, if not all of you, are leaving the walls of the yeshiva and going out into the world, probably learning a trade and be working for a living. And Chazal say in Pirkei Avos, Yafet Talmud Torah in Derech Eretz. It's a nice way to be serving the Rebbeinu Shalom by combining Torah learning, which you surely have to do. Everybody has to learn Torah, no matter old, young, poor, rich. Even if you're busy earning a living, you also have to devote time to learning Torah. But combining it with a worldly occupation is a nice thing. Truth is, there is a machlokes in the Gemara in Brachos between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. How do you resolve the following contradiction, seemingly? One pasuk says, "V'hagisa bo yom v'layla, v'yomu sefer haTorah hazeh mipicha, v'hagisa bo yom v'layla," pasuk in Yoshua, that you should meditate, learn Torah day and night. That doesn't leave too much time for anything else. And yet, Torah says, "V'yosafta digonecha," you gather in your crops. And your crops means that you planted them and you harvested them and did everything else in between. So that means that you can work. So how do you resolve this contradiction? On the one hand, it says that you have to learn Torah day and night, which doesn't leave you time to do anything else. And then it says that you can work, right? So Rabbi Shmuel says the resolution is Hanegi Mohem Minig Derech Eretz, that you should combine the learning with working, and that somehow answers the question. The question is, how does that answer the question? That was the question. If you're supposed to learn all the time and you combine it with anything else, you're not learning all the time. But we'll get to Rabbi Shmuel in a second, so that's what we're going to speak about. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai argues, and he says no. If you're going to be working and then plowing and planting and harvesting, when are you going to learn? Ella, the pasuk that says you should learn Torah day and night is talking when you're doing Ratzon Hashem. You're on a madrega. You're on the level that you could be considered doing God's will, then you'll be able to learn full time and other people will support you. But if you're not on that level, then you have to work. That's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Okay, so we have two opinions. What's the ideal? Is the ideal to sit and learn in a kollel and learn all the time? Or is the ideal to combine learning with working? So the Gemara ends with the following. Harbe asu, Rabbi Shmuel v'chaveira v'also b'yadav. A lot of people try to do like Rabbi Shmuel and combine Torah learning with an occupation, and they were successful. And Harbe asu, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai v'lo also b'yadav. Successful, then you have to do like that. If the halacha is like Rabbi Shmuel, what do I care if people were successful or not? You have to do that. Says the Brisker Rav, no, that's the halacha. The majority of people have to follow Rabbi Shmuel. And they have to combine a worldly occupation with Torah. They have to set times for Torah and also what's it called work. But there have to be a minority of people in Klal Yisrael that are devoted totally to Torah. There were 12 tribes. 2 of them were devoted totally to Torah, and 10 had occupations. So the halacha for the majority is one thing, and the halacha for the minority is another thing. So says the Brisker Rav. And that explains a Mishnah in Kedushin. The Mishnah says, Reb Meir said, you must teach your child a trade. Later on in the Mishnah, Reb Nurai says, no, I'm going to forego any occupation and trade, and I'm going to only teach my son Torah. So we have an argument. Reb Meir says you have to teach your son a trade. Reb Nurai says that you should teach him only Torah. There's only one problem. Reb Meir and Reb Nurai were the same person. The Gemara says in Eruvin that his name was Reb Nurai, which in Aramaic means light, but he was called Reb Meir because he enlightened the Jewish people. So how in the world can Reb Nurai and Reb Meir argue? He wasn't schizophrenic. Or argue with yourself. How can he say, you must teach your child trade, but I'm not doing it? Says the Briskerov. That's the answer. Reb Meir, who was talking to the Hamon Am, to the general population, so he said you have to teach your child a trade. But Reb Meir, the father of an individual child, said, my child is on the level to learn Torah all the time. He's going to learn Torah all the time. And therefore it says, Yofa Talmud Torah, that it may not be the ideal level, but it's an acceptable level to work and to learn. It's 100% okay. The person who does that is not a failure. That's part of what Klal Yisrael is, as we'll see a little bit later on. But first I want to discuss with you, how does that work? How do we say that a person can combine Torah with a worldly occupation, and that somehow explains the seeming contradiction between working, devoting time to working, and learning all the time. If you're devoting time to working, you're not learning all the time. So I think the simplest answer, I didn't see anybody who says this openly. It could be there are people who say it, but in my mind the simplest answer is the following. What Rabbi Shmuel means. Rabbi Shmuel means, and the Gemara is mashma like that. Rabbi Shmuel means the following. It's impossible to understand that pasuk, to learn Torah day and night, literally. Why? Because it's impossible. You have to sleep. And even though I have Balabatim who tell me that when I give my drushes, they're listening when they're sleeping, but the Maisa, usually you can't learn when you sleep. You have to eat. Most people can't learn when they eat. And even if you can learn in your sleep and learn when you eat, you have to go to the bathroom. You're not allowed to learn then. So it's impossible to learn 24/7, day and night. It's impossible humanly. So what must the pasuk mean? Whenever it's humanly possible to learn, learn. Day and night, whenever it's humanly possible. Says Rabbi Shmuel, there's one other thing that a human being has to do besides eat, sleep, and take care of his bodily needs, work. Because if you don't work, you'll starve to death. So that's also out of the equation. What it means is, whenever you're not doing something that's derech eretz, the way of the world, that humanly you have to do as a human being, the rest of the time you should be learning. That's how I think the simplest idea of Rabbi Shmuel is. Reb Chaim Voloshener says another idea. He says it says Hanegi mohem bini derech eretz. Together with the Torah, learn. Doesn't mean to split your time up. It means that while you're working, you can learn. Sometimes you're learning in a beis medrash, and sometimes you're learning while you're working. If you can whistle while you work, you can learn while you work also. We used to have a vineyard that we took care of in Matityahu years ago. And in the winters, a lot of times Rosh Yeshivas would send us Bachrim from the yeshivas that were too intense in their learning and needed literally to chill out a little bit out in the fields. So they came for a week or two, and we put them to work in pruning the vines or whatever, what you do in the winter. And while they were working, they had earphones on. And they told me they're listening to shiurim, listening to drushes, shmuzim, or whatever. I never listened to what they were listening, but that's what they told me they were listening. I assumed that was what. So they were working and they were learning at the same time. So that's what Rabbi Shmuel said. Sometimes you're learning in a beis medrash, and sometimes you're learning while you're working. There's only one problem with that explanation. It limits the occupations that a Jew can have. Because you may be able to prune grapevines while you're listening to your daf yomi. But if you're a brain surgeon and you are operating on somebody's brain and at the same time you're listening to your daf yomi, you're a murderer. It's not something to do. Right? So you can't be a brain surgeon because you can't learn while you work. Okay, there's another possibility. You're not learning daf yomi while you are operating on somebody's brain. But you can be thinking about the halachas of operating on people's brains. When you're allowed to take a risk, when not, when you have to ask another opinion. There are a lot of halachas of what you're doing, how you can do it properly. And that's also learning. Learning about what you're doing while you're doing it is also called learning. That's a possibility. That still limits a person's occupation. Because if you're on an assembly line and your job is to put one bolt into these chassis of a car, and cars keep passing by, and you're putting that one bolt in, and you have to have your mind on what you're doing, because it has to be precision. You can't be thinking about something else. Be thinking about putting that bolt in. How much can you think about the halachas of putting a bolt into the chassis of a car? It doesn't really pan out. So that isn't possible to fulfill learning all the time and working, because you can't think in learning because you have to think what you're doing, and you can't think about the laws of doing it because there aren't too many laws about doing it. Therefore, the major answer, I think, is the following. And this is a tremendous thing to remember when you'll get a job and when you'll be working. Give you an example to what we're going to say. The Meiri explains the Gemara that you're all familiar with, Gemara in Brachos and Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara says, whoever eats and drinks on the 9th day of Tishrei, Erev Yom Kippur, is like he fasted 2 days. Okay? It's a mitzvah to eat Erev Yom Kippur, and if you eat Erev Yom Kippur, it's like you fasted 2 days. So Meiri says, if there's a mitzvah to eat, so eat. It doesn't say, whoever eats on Shabbos, like he fasted. There's a mitzvah to eat, he ate. There's a mitzvah to eat Erev Yom Kippur. Why does that say it's like you fasted 2 days? What does that mean? And he explains in the following way. He says, the Torah, when it gave us a mitzvah to fast on Yom Kippur, the purpose of that fast is that we should take our mind off our physical world. Don't work, don't eat, don't be involved in any of the physical pleasures of this world. So one day you can concentrate totally on the spiritual world. That's what Yom Kippur is all about. But if you don't eat Erev Yom Kippur, you're going to be so hungry on Yom Kippur that you're going to have one thought on your mind the whole Yom Kippur, your stomach. That's not the purpose of Yom Kippur. So the Torah wanted you to eat Erev Yom Kippur, so when you fast on Yom Kippur, you'll be able to take your mind off of eating and can concentrate on Kedusha. Comes out that the eating Erev Yom Kippur is the preparation to be able to fast properly on Yom Kippur. The preparation for a mitzvah is part of the mitzvah itself. Therefore, if somebody's building a sukkah, there's no mitzvah in the Torah to build a sukkah. If you have a built sukkah, right, you don't have to build a new sukkah on sukkahs. Okay, certain halachas midrabanan, and maybe you have to move the snach around, but min Torah, there's no mitzvah to build a sukkah. But if you don't have a sukkah, you have to build one, otherwise you won't be able to dwell in the sukkah. The mitzvah is dwelling in the sukkah. There's no bracha you make on building a sukkah. The mitzvah is dwelling in the sukkah. But if somebody's building a sukkah, Erev Sukkos, the week before Sukkot, he's busy building a sukkah, and you ask him, what mitzvah are you doing? What's he going to tell you? I'm involved in the mitzvah of sukkah, except I'm in the preparatory stage. So that's part of the mitzvah. You're osek the mitzvah, you're doing a mitzvah, even though you're not fulfilling a mitzvah, but you're involved in the preparation for the mitzvah, that's part of the mitzvah itself. So too says the Meiri, when you eat on Erev Yom Kippur, you're involved in the preparing for the mitzvah fasting. And that's part of the mitzvah fasting. So it's like you fasted 2 days. The first day you were involved in the preparation for the fasting, and the second day, the fasting itself. So you fasted 2 days. One through the preparation. How do you prepare to fast? By eating. And the other one, the actual fasting. That's the Meiri. Comes out like this. And we'll see that there are plenty of sources to say this. A person who works for a living, but his intention is to be able to have time to learn Torah. Because if he doesn't work, he won't eat. He won't be able to pay his rent or his mortgage. Right? He won't be able to send his kids to yeshivas and girls' schools. So he won't be able to live a Torah life. So his entire reason for earning a living is to be able to live a Torah life. That's called learning Torah. Learning Torah doesn't just mean learning. Because if you don't observe what you're learning, it's better you don't learn. So it's the whole gamut of living and creating a Torah life. That's called learning Torah. So a person who works, and his entire intention in working is, I'm preparing in order to be able to live a Torah life. And in order to do that, I have to earn a living, but I'm doing it to live. And I'm living in order to create a Torah life and to learn Torah. then the time that he's working is the preparation for learning. And that's part of the learning itself. It's like you're learning. So you're learning all the time. Partially in the preparation and partially in the actual learning. To show you the Ksav Sofer it says in this week's Sedra, L'mantia Torah Hashem b'ficha, by the mitzvah of tefillin, that if you put on tefillin, it's like you're learning Torah, the Nebuch says. Ksav Sofer explains why is putting on tefillin like learning Torah. He says like this, he says really you're supposed to put on tefillin the whole day, even when you're working. Okay? That's why he says we put tefillin on the weaker hand to leave the stronger hand to work. Otherwise you would interfere with your work. You have to work with your stronger hand. But if while you're working, you realize you're tied to the Rabbanu Shalom, and you're working in order to be able to live a Torah life and serve the Rabbanu Shalom, to make a living so you can live. And you can live to serve Hashem, then your working is mamish like learning Torah, because you're tied to the Rabbanu Shalom. So wearing tefillin is like tying yourself to the Rabbanu Shalom through your work is like learning Torah. He says that's why we don't wear tefillin at night or on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Because when can you say that wearing tefillin and working is like learning when you can't learn? But at night you're not working. Shabbos and Yom Tov you're not working. So then you can't put on tefillin and like you're learning, go learn. And when you can learn. If you can't, because you have to work, so then tying yourself to the Rabbanu Shalom through the work, that's like you're learning Torah. Even more than that. I'll tell you a Mogin Ho'elef that was written by the same person who wrote, same Rav who wrote the Pele Yoetz, Rebbe Lezer Papa. He's famous for the Pele Yoetz. I'm sure you've heard things quoted for the Pele Yoetz, but I'm sure you've never heard of the Sefer Mogin Ho'elef. It's a Sefer of Drush on Torah. Drush, not drushes. Drush is something we're not familiar with that much. Drush is where you take a pasuk and totally take it out of context and use it for a homiletical idea. You'll see in 1 second what he says in this week's Sedra. It's relevant to this week's Sedra. The pasuk in this week's Sedra says the following. Paro, I'll just give you the background of the pasuk itself, and then we'll see how he takes it and turns it into a drush. Paro says to Moshe, okay, I'll let you go. Who's going? So, what's it called? Moshe says, we're taking our cattle with us, everybody. So Paro says, nothing doing. You can go, leave your cattle here. I want a guarantee you're coming back. Moshe says, V'gam mikneinu yelech imanu. No, our cattle's going with us. Lo sishair parsa, not one hoof will stay in Mitzrayim. Why? Because we have to take from these animals to serve God. God said He wants sacrifices. And we don't know what sacrifice. He didn't tell us what sacrifices. So we may need all of our animals. So we're taking everything with us. That's the pasuk. Simple meaning of the pasuk. Comes along the Mogin Ho'elef and says the following. He says that person spends most of his time in this world involved in things that he can't take with him to the next world. He's involved with earning a living, with gashmius, with material things. And tachrichim, the shrouds that they put on a person who dies, don't have pockets. You can't take it with you. Okay. So isn't it a shame that a person spends most of his life in this world involved in things that he's not going to be able to take with him for eternity? Says the Pele Yoetz, Mogin Ho'elef, not true. V'gam nikneinu yelech imanu. Even our material acquisitions. You work and earn a living, you can take that with you to Olam Haba too. Gam nikneinu yelech imanu. He says how? Follow the following prescription. First condition, lo sishaer. All the lows. Don't steal, don't cheat, don't lie, leave to the side. Earn an honest living. That's the first condition. If you earn a dishonest living, you're not going to take that to Olam Haba. You may take it past the grave, but you're not going to go to Olam Haba with it. So that's the first condition. Earn an honest living. Lo sishaer. Next, parsa. He takes the word parsa and splits it into two. Proseh. Set aside 5 times in the day to be involved in spiritual pursuits. 3 times a day daven, preferably with a minyan, and 2 times a day to learn Torah, morning and night. Bikovea itim Torah. Second condition. Third condition. Ki mimenu nikach lavodas Hashem. When you're working, have in mind that you're working in order to use what you're earning to serve Hashem. Now comes the clincher. Says the Peleiotes. Somebody who follows that prescription, earns an honest living, sets aside 5 times in the day to be involved directly in spiritual things, and while he's working, has in mind that he's doing it in order to serve Hashem. We have no idea who is more of a servant of God, the somebody who learns all day and somebody who follows this prescription ad boenu sham, until we get to the next world. Only the Rebbe knows. It's possible for a person who works according to that prescription to be on the same level as somebody who's sitting and learning in a kollel or learning all day. That's what he says. I didn't say it, he says. The Peleiotes. In any case, that explains, according to what I understand, explains a very difficult Tosfos. The Gemara in Shabbos, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that Ein Tchilas Dino Shel Adam El Al Divrei Torah. When you come to the next world, the first thing they judge you on is how much Torah you learned. Yet the Gemara in Shabbos says, when you get to the next world, they ask you 6 questions. The first one is, Nosata v'nosasa b'emunah, did you deal honestly in business? And the second one is, Kovata itim l'Torah. So Tosfos says, just hear it. Here it says the first thing they judge you on is Divrei Torah. And here it says the first thing they ask you about is your business. So Tosfos gives a very cryptic answer. He says, they ask you first about your business. Then they ask you about Torah. And then they judge you first on the Torah. Doesn't make sense. If they would judge you first on the Torah, ask you first about Torah. Why would they ask you first about business, then about Torah, and then judge you first on the Torah? According to what I told you now, it's very simple. Let's say a guy learns 2 hours a day, and he works 8 hours a day, okay? But he learns an hour before he goes to work, an hour at night, he comes home, goes to a shiur, and he works hard 8 hours a day. Comes to the next world. If they would ask him first, how many hours did you spend learning Torah? He's going to have to say, well, I spent 2 hours. But that may not be true. Because maybe when he was working, he had in mind that he's doing it in order to be able to learn and to live a Torah life. And then that time is a preparation for the learning, and it's counted like learning, mamish. So before they can ascertain how much time he spent learning, they first have to find out how it worked. And if he worked with the right kavanah, it could be that he has 10 hours a day of learning. Not 8, not 2, because the 8 hours he was working count as learning time. So there's only way that we can possibly judge him on Torah is by asking him first about his business. So that is how learning, how working can be mamish like learning. The Smarno says that Klal Yisrael, like we said, has 2 factions. There's the people who are devoted totally to Torah, which Klal Yisrael needs desperately, and then the people who combine their worldly occupation with Torah, which also built Klal Yisrael. Like I told you, there were 10 tribes that had occupations, 2 tribes that were devoted totally to Torah, and they worked together. Says the Sforno, they're represented by the menorah. The menorah had 3 branches to the right and 3 branches to the left. And then the menorah itself was the middle branch. And it says in Baloscha, El Mul Pnei HaMenorah Ya'iru Shiva Saneros. Towards the middle, which is the menorah, the 7 lights illuminate. Says this far, that's not true. 6 lights illuminated to the middle. The middle didn't illuminate on itself. Should have said Ya'iru Sheisha Saneros. He says, no, what it means is the following. The 3 branches to the right represent people who are devoted to Torah exclusively. The 3 branches on the left are the people who combine Torah with a worldly occupation. When they both face the middle, which is God's light, and they do what they're doing, l'shem shamayim. They're doing it the proper way. The people who are learning full-time are learning full-time and learning with the right kavanah and then the right level. And the people who are working with the right intention. And they're doing what they're doing, l'shem shamayim. Then the light of God comes from all seven. I'd like to add to that svarno one part. When they turn to the middle, aside from looking at God's light and doing it l'shem shamayim, they're also looking at each other. When the people on the right can appreciate and respect the people on the left, meaning that the people who are learning full-time can look at the people who are working and not consider them second-class citizens, but appreciate what they're doing, right? And the people on the left can look at the people learning all the time and not look at them like parasites. They respect each other, then the light of Hashem comes from all of them. They're doing what they're doing, l'shem shamayim, and they respect each other and appreciate each other. That's the way Klal Yisrael should be. And it's interesting, where you are on the menorah is many times your choice, but in the end, it's not your choice really. The Rebbeinu Shalom pushes you where you're supposed to be. Some people consider they're going to go into business or whatever, and in the end, they end up learning full time. Either because who they marry or whatever, or situations that come up. I think it was with Chaim Volozhiner's father was a big businessman, went bankrupt, and ended up learning the full time and creating the Volozhin dynasty. So we had one plan, and the Rebbeinu had another plan. And sometimes people plan on learning full time, it doesn't work out, and they have to go into business or whatever. The menorah, even though it was supposed to be made by Moshe and Bezalel, neither one could do it. They threw it into the fire and came out by itself. It means that where you are on the menorah really depends on the Rebbeinu Shalom. But it's interesting that the menorah has 7, konim, and they represent the different occupations. The ones on the left, people who are involved in worldly occupations. The ones on the right, people who are involved in occupations that are devoted totally to Torah. And there's 3 kinds of occupations on both sides. And they're really 2 sides of the same thing. There are functionaries, rabbanim, dayanim, right? And there's functionaries in the secular community also. Lawyers, doctors, so on, who serve the public. And then there are people who are miners and farmers who create the raw materials of the world. There's people sitting and learning Torah who are creating the raw materials of the spiritual world. And then there are people who are in the creating the infrastructure of the Torah world. They're administrators and fundraisers or whatever. They don't have a secular occupation, but they're not learning Torah all the time either, but they're creating the infrastructure for the Torah world. And then there are people creating the infrastructure of the secular world. So there's 7 konim, and the one in the middle represents what brings them all together to do what they're doing, l'shem shamayim, and to respect each other. It's interesting, this the Midrashim point out, there are 7 words in the first pasuk of Bereshis. So the 7 konim represent Bereshis. That's the Yetzirah, that's the creation of the Jewish people, right, is a 7-branched menorah. People on the right side, people on the left side, that's what Klal Yisrael is. And then there are kaftorim. They're like spheres that represent shleimus, perfection, circles, a perfect thing. So there are spheres on the buttons, like. That represents the fact that whatever you're doing, whether you're learning full-time, you're a Rav, you're a Kollel person, you're a Menahel, do your job perfectly as you can. You're working as an accountant, as a doctor, as a lawyer, as a businessman, do your job as perfectly as you can. That's the kaftor. And there are 11 kaftorim, and there are 11 words in the first pasuk of Shmos. Shmos represents Geula, the formation of the Jewish people, as perfect as it can be. Goel, build the Mishkan, right? That's perfection. And then there are flowers on the menorah. Flowers represent growth. Whatever you do, your secular occupation, your Torah occupation, grow. Use it for growth. Grow from it. Right? You're an accountant. Do it honestly, whatever, and you'll grow from that. Your mitos will change also. Use your occupation for growth, both on the Torah side and the secular side. And there are 9 prachim in the menorah. There are 9 words in the first pasuk of Vayikra. Vayikra represents kedusha, tahara, Torah's kohanim, growth, spiritual growth. And then there are 17 tvachim. Really, it's 18. I don't know why they say 7, but it's 17 tvachim of the height of the menorah. And there's 17 words in the first pasuk of Vayikra. Because that is the height of the Jewish people. Sometimes they're going down, sometimes going up. Mitzvahs, what they did, and Averas they did. That's the sheer koma of a person. That's represented by Sefer Bamidbar. And lastly, there are, Geviyim. 3 Geviyim on each thing. 22 Geviyim altogether, 1 on the base also. Those are cups. A cup represents the fact that you receive something. Everybody on his branch has 3 cups. You receive from all the other people who are doing the same thing you're doing, and from all the other people doing whatever other things they're supposed to do. That's achdus. I benefit, right, from the people, all the people working, and the other kind of people who are learning, and they benefit from the fact that there's rabbanim. So that's the Gavia. That's Sefer Devarim. Sefer Devarim is Musar. You have to receive from other people also. Tochacha, Musar. That's Sefer Devarim. Mishnah Torah. So, Mirza Hashem, if you understand that, you're going to be Mekayim, like we said in Pirkei Avos. Yofet Talmud Torah in Derech Eretz. It's a nice madrega. May not be the highest madrega, but if you do it properly, and that's what you are capable of doing, then that is your shleimus. And if you do it properly, you could be on the same level as somebody learning Torah all the time. And the main thing is to take your talents, abilities, capabilities, qualities, and use them in service of the Rebbeinu Shalom. So how bad is it if you don't? The Kedusha Arim says that on Nila of Yom Kippur, there's no time to say the long Al-Chet. So they substituted with 3 paragraphs that start at Hanosein Yad Laposha. In there's one confession, one sin we confess. L'manechtal me'oshik yodeinu. We should stop stealing. Says the Kedusha Arim, that's the one sin that every man, woman, and child in Klal Yisrael, every Nila Yom Kippur has to confess we're a bunch of thieves. That's Klal Yisrael. We're all robbers. Anyway, give you a marshal to what he says. You have a engineering firm that sends scouts to the high school senior class. They're looking for young, talented people that if they go to college and take engineering, they'll be great engineers. They score highest in math, and they're very artistic. Put the 2 together, you got a great engineer. So they find one young man, and they say, wow, you have great math scores, and we see you're very artistic. We think that if you go to college and take engineering, you're going to be a real special engineer. And we have an engineering firm, and we're looking for young, talented engineers to join our firm. We're willing to payroll your college education, take engineering, with one condition, that when you graduate, you come and work for our firm for 5 years. So we're preparing for the future of our firm. Signs on the dotted line, what could be better? A fully paid for college education and a guaranteed job. Goes through college, gets his degree, comes to work for the firm. But instead of doing anything constructive, from 9 to 5 every day, he sits and plays computer games. That's it. What sin is that person guilty of? He's a thief. They put all this money into him, right? They invested in him, and he's not giving them a return on his investment. So they stole all that money. So says the Kedusha Arim, similarly. God invested a lot of us, more than money. He gave us a neshama, a body, talents, abilities, capabilities, material possessions. All he wants to see is a return on his investment. What is that? That we should use what he gave us in his service. We come to Yom Kippur and we look back over the year and we see that not only aren't we using what God gave us in his service, sometimes we're using it for the competition. We're a bunch of thieves. So we promised to the Baal Shalom, we're not going to thieve, we're not going to steal this year. We're going to start using what you invest in us for your sake. So if you have talents, abilities, capabilities, and you're capable of putting them into a secular occupation, and you'll do it honestly, and you'll do it with the right intentions, so then you'll be doing it basically to be able to live a Torah life. That's your main purpose. So then you'll be mamish on par with somebody who's sitting and learning all day. And in addition, since you can't learn all day, you can only be as if you're learning all day. So you have to support people who are learning all day. That's part of what you're earning a living to also support people who are learning. And the Chafetz Chaim points out, right? The Torah is a tree of life to the people who support it. The people who support it are fortunate. So there's two kinds of support. It's a tree of life l'machazikim. Machazik means to hold on to something for dear life. You're drowning and a log passes by, you're machzik, you hold on to it. Tomech means you support the thing. Somebody who thinks that he's supporting the Torah, so the Torah is, he's fortunate, but it's not a tree of life to him. But somebody who knows that when he supports people learning Torah, he's supporting himself. He's holding on to it for dear life. It says the people who carried the Aron, he carried them. If you support the Torah supports you. A person who understands that, for him it's a tree of life. So in addition to doing your job honestly, and to learning when you can, right, and making as much time as you can, and doing it with the right intentions, and then you're basically as if you're learning all day. But since you're not learning all day, and there are people who are capable of doing that, and they need people to support them because they're not working for a living, so if you support them also, then you have that mila also of being partners with people who are learning all day, and that's what's it called. And then you should feel that if you go and leave the yeshiva, you come back every once in a while to recharge your batteries, and to spend a week, two, yarchei kala, whatever, in a situation where you're sitting and learning again, so you recharge your batteries, get re-evaluate what you're doing and how you're doing it. But you should really feel never that you're a failure because you're not sitting and learning all day. There's room just on two sides of the menorah. On one side of the menorah is not a menorah. There's room on both sides. There's room in Klal Yisrael for Yofet Talmud Torah in Derech Eretz, for people who are devoted totally to Torah, people who are combining a worldly occupation with Torah, and neither side is chas v'sholom a failure. That's what you're capable of doing. That's what you do best. You should do that. And the people who are learning, you should respect them. If you're learning, you should respect the people who are working. And in that way, Klal Yisrael will reach its ultimate purpose of being an Or La'amim, a light to the nations of the world. And that light comes from both sides of the menorah.